Welcome to It's a Woman's World, a show which discusses any and all topics under the sun from a woman's point of view. We believe that all women everywhere should be treated with respect at all times. Here's today's moderator, Ali Nathani.
Welcome to the show, and we're going to get started by introducing our co-host for today. We have with us Nadia Jordana. Hi, Nadia.
Hi, I'm glad I could be here today.
So great to see you. And we also have Dr. Catherine Kelly with us.
And I'm glad to be here too. I'm very excited.
Yeah, it's good to be back at the table, isn't it? Yeah, well, we are going to be talking about healing traumatic memories today. So really looking forward to this conversation. I've been thinking a lot about what we've got going on in the world today with, women and, children and vets. And, every time you open up that newspaper, there's just that another story, I feel like.
Seems like more than usual, a lot more than usual is going on, isn't it?
It seems like maybe people are more aware, and the more aware you get, it seems the more you're going to have those awareness of all of those memories that really can hurt.
Yes, and I hope today we'll be able to bring to our viewers some perspective about there is that need for healing and why that's important and what that can do for people. Yeah. So I'd like to introduce our guest. Our guest today is Sheila Laughton. Welcome, Sheila.
Thank you.
Yes, and you are the lead facilitator for Healing of Memories workshops.
I am.
All right. Well, we thank you for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
We're very interested to hear about your background and how you got to the place you are at right now.
Well, I was in the military for about 27 years in the Air Force, and I experienced a lot of different kinds of events, and I knew people who had experienced different events as well. When I retired, I moved back to Minnesota, my home, and I saw that there was a need to help people process some of the memories. So originally I started out working with veterans. I am also a spiritual director, and I worked with Loyola Spirituality Center in St. Paul, and I created a program called Welcome Home. And what that does is help the transition. So from the military or from a deployment and getting back into normalcy. And one of the things that a lot of people needed to process were some traumatic events. Not necessarily the combat type events, but it can also be car accidents, abuse, anything that bothers a person and that causes a memory. Sometimes you just need a little extra time to actually look at those things and say, how is this affecting me? And if it's not affecting you, then it's not a big deal. But if it is causing an undue influence on your life, maybe it's making you more anxious, maybe it's keeping you from making friends or getting out, maybe you're isolating because you just don't feel comfortable outside. Those are the kind of memories that need to be what I will call healed. We're not trying to cure, and we're certainly not trying to forget those memories because that's what makes us who we are. They provide the lenses that we see the world through and that how we experience things. But at the same time, certain emotions that we've had associated with these memories can be very disturbing to our everyday life.
Does this fall into the category of PTSD, or is there a difference between the two things?
Not really. I mean, PTSD is it's a medical term, and I don't diagnose.
They don't need to have that in order to come to you for help.
Not at all.
And when we say PTSD, we mean it's post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
Right, that's what that stands for. Okay. Okay.
But post-traumatic stress disorder is usually caused by traumatic events. And trauma and stress is cumulative. So if you had a rough childhood and then you go into the military and have some experiences of combat or even just the training aspect, it's adding up. And so all of a sudden, like one day, it's just the last straw. And that last straw might have been something very, very simple, like a car backfiring. You just, all of a sudden, it's the last thing. And you're starting to have the kind of symptoms that keep you from enjoying your day-to-day life.
How does this process say I have something that keeps coming up and it's bothering me so much. Talk a little bit about this process of telling my story, not just perhaps to you, but even to others, any others. How does that heal?
Let me start by saying, in a very, very non-medical terms, about memories. So when we see something happen on a normal basis, it's kind of like a library that gets a book in through the return, and the librarian picks it up and looks at it and then puts it away in a specific spot, or a file clerk. Well, if it's a traumatic event, you've got the adrenaline running, you've got time pressures, you've got stress, and it's more like a truck backing up and dumping a whole load. So the librarian, which probably I would say is sleep, can't handle everything. So things get kind of tossed. And if you think of the old-fashioned filing cabinets, which works better than computer filing, you've got papers, which are individual memories, stuck in the wrong files. So healing of memories is kind of like going through those files and pulling it out and saying, well, that really doesn't go there. Well, why doesn't it go there? Well, it's about an event over here. Well, again, what is the feeling behind that event? So healing of memories is to remember it. You can't heal something you can't remember. You know, like repressed memories, that's a whole different process. And what I'm talking about too is a subclinical process. So it's not, you know, a psychologist or a psychiatrist or an analyst. This is people in general. You can do it for yourself, and you can do it for other people. But to look at that memory and what was the feeling associated with it. Perhaps it was a car accident, a traumatic car accident, and you just keep seeing it running through your head. Well, tell me about that. So, well, I was driving down the road, and I did this, and then I did this, and then this happened, and well, how did that feel at the time? What was the feeling? Can you name an emotion? Well, terror, horror. And while you say these things, your brain is kind of going, oh, okay, we can put this piece of file over here, we can put this over here. And some of our memories are very life-giving, and we certainly don't want to just lose them, but others can overwhelm them. And certain emotions that we have are not very life-giving. Feelings just are. They are not good or bad. They just are. So when you feel a feeling, and sometimes with the vets I use the F word, feeling, because you're kind of taught not to feel, and like first responders as well, you can't stop and process that right as it's going on. And so what your memory kind of does is put stuff in a place, not necessarily the right place. So healing is to recognize the fact that it was, to associate the feeling with the memory, and again, look at the memory and look at the feeling. How is it impacting me physically? So if I'm angry about something and I'm very upset with some person, anger has a lot of energy in it, and it is neither good nor bad.
And it can affect people physically, can't it?
That's right. It can cause stress ulcers. It can cause high blood pressure. So my feeling those things right now for an event that happened way back when is certainly not very healthy. So, okay, I've associated all of these together, and now I say, okay, what was the context? Trying to process this whole thing. Now, maybe I caused the accident and I feel guilt and shame. Maybe my passenger caused it and I feel frustration and anger. Maybe somebody ran in front of the street. So you try to put this in perspective, and for someone who did cause the accident to recognize, yeah, there's going to be a certain amount of guilt for it, but the shame and the difference between guilt and shame.
And the fact that it was unintentional probably helps, I would think.
How much control did you actually have over the situation? Are you still beating yourself up? Did you have control, and are you taking responsibility that you shouldn't be taking?
Does that come into this business about if we were ever all at the same place and saw an accident, we'd all report it very differently.
Right.
So my memories of the exact same setting that we're in will be very different than yours or yours. So the idea here, I'm assuming, is my memories don't have to be right, and like feelings, memories aren't good or bad.
They just are.
They're there. Yeah, they are. And some of our talking about it, having a chance to explore it further, gives us a chance to really look at it out here somehow, so it's not just constantly continuing to play in there.
So it's a little bit beyond just telling your story. You can go into the closet and tell your story, and it probably won't be very healing, but it'll be better than nothing. But if you have someone to listen, really listen, and not judge you, someone who can give you a little bit of feedback, not to say you did right or did wrong, but just say, oh, that must have been very painful.
Is this what happens in the workshops? Is this in a group situation, or is it one-on-one?
It can certainly be one-on-one, but my most familiarity is with the Healing of Memories workshops. And that is a very structured process where the group, usually about 20 people, they start out by getting to know each other, and they draw a picture of their life. And again, when it's all in front of you, you can see connections that you couldn't see inside of your head. And then when you actually tell your story in the workshop, you're using that picture to tell this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And you're telling it out loud. Someone is hearing you. For a lot of women, and certainly with all the stuff that's been going on now, it's being believed.
That's so important, isn't it? That people feel valued and acknowledged, and that someone listened to me. And one of the things that you were talking about earlier, Sheila, was that I used to work in healthcare, and so working with nurses, they'd have a traumatic event, and they're supposed to be this professional nurse and well. And suddenly it dawned on me one day, as I work in human resources, and I said, well, this nurse just saw this patient die. And what do we expect her to do? We expect her to get just right back on the job, right back on the shift, go take care of the rest of the 6 patients. And so when you said that, I was also thinking about even with child abuse, so sexual child abuse, and you often hear stories where people say, oh, that happened, and then they're just supposed to get back to life. And I think that is something that is so hard to understand when as much of information we know today too, that how are people supposed to, when you have these traumatic events, just get back to life? And maybe they're not ready to process and deconstruct it, and maybe that takes time.
It usually does.
Yeah, so can you talk a little bit about that? Like, is everybody just ready to do this healing?
Well, everyone's always ready to start the process. And with the Healing of Memories workshops, we talk about it being one step on the healing process. But generally speaking, you have to take a number of steps before you can get there. But when the event happens, one of the things that you can do, first off, is just a little self-care, being gentle with yourself. And that might mean sitting down, having a cup of coffee. It might mean taking a walk. When you're in a profession that, like first responders or nursing, you don't have a whole lot of time, so sometimes it's just regulating your breathing and trying to get out of that flight or fight. And I like to say there's another reaction to adrenaline besides fight and flight, and that's tend and befriend. And now they add freeze because they see what deer do. But one thing, women are a little bit different, and sometimes that we will go out and try to help everybody else. Sometimes that might be a good thing because it takes it off of our mind. Sometimes not so much.
A way of burying memories rather than remembering. Yeah, and really going back to it.
The going back to it is probably what a lot of people really need to do. But just to start off with, try regulating your breathing. Try taking a 30-second break. Or, there's other things you can do too.
And if you're willing to listen to someone, it seems to me that that's one of the most wonderful things we can do, because even without saying anything like validating what it is you're saying, we are validating them as a human being and saying, it was very important for you to tell me or tell someone your memories. And when we tell them, it's important, other people, by listening.
Well, and it's not necessary to give advice.
Not at all.
It's the listening that's the important part.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily have to feel obligated to solve the issue or give advice, just be there.
I'm wondering if you think in this culture that we're living in, are we more available to each other to help by just being there and listening? Or are we more in need of people to guide us through things like a workshop because we're not spending the time listening?
My personal impression is I don't think we're spending enough time listening. One of the ways we separate ourselves from reality is with our electronics.
Absolutely.
So you see something horrific happening, and instead of dealing with it and helping each other, they're photographing it and putting it on Facebook. And that's challenging. I mean, there's a lot of good things about connecting so that, you know, I'm still safe. Are you okay? That kind of thing is, you know, very good and necessary, but we don't listen to each other as much as we should.
Sometimes family members aren't as good at that as one would hope or expect them to be. And if you're someone, I think of myself, who probably would not turn to friends or whatever it is and go that direction, might flounder along all by themselves trying to deal with something until they learned about or heard about workshops like yours. And so it'd be a great avenue for people like that.
I think that's one of the reasons why people tell stories on trains and airplanes, you know, when you're kind of, you've got this random seatmate who's kind of stuck there. And, you know, you can actually start thinking about some things. But yeah, it's a challenge. And I think today people also are looking for a short clip, you know, give me the Reader's Digest version of it. Again, working with veterans, people will say, well, how was the war? How was your deployment? And they give them 30 seconds, and then that's it. So if you ask the question, you need to be willing to listen to it as well. And look at the appropriate place. One veteran was telling me she was at a basketball game, so, you know, it's like this. Oh, so did you shoot anybody during the war? What? You know?
Yeah.
The place was inappropriate. The situation was inappropriate.
And get past the knee-jerk response when you ask someone how it was or to share some experiences, and they just say, oh, fine, or it was all right, and dismiss it. You kind of have to dig a little to get past that.
I think it's a matter of safety, of feeling safe that they can tell the story. And you mentioned a little earlier about families maybe not being the best places. Well, for veterans, a lot of veterans would say, I don't want to traumatize my family. I don't want them to know the situations that I was in, how much danger I was in, because I don't want them to worry. And I would say my background is having not only been a veteran, or am a veteran, but so is my husband and 2 sons. So I have been on various sides. And the family worries no matter what. That's just what we do.
And maybe one of the ways of showing how much we really deeply care for other people is being willing to actually share our memories with them. And I think if people were drawn grandfathers or people that you wanted to hear from, and you said how much it meant, if you will share your memories with me, I want to hear, I want to know, then it's a sense of being appreciated, loved, engaged.
That's right.
But it does take time.
It does.
Yeah.
And I would say with grandparents in particular, you know, I felt like my time was running out. But a lot of the World War II veterans, you know, never said anything. They were busy with their lives. And that's pretty much the same with all veterans. You come back, you pick up to the best you can, and you don't want to dwell on things. But when something else happens, for instance, retirement, or you lose a job, or there's a illness or death in the family, all of a sudden that kind of stuff comes back, and you're more able to think about what's going on and maybe process it just a little bit.
Well, one thing I was wondering about, Nadia, when you use the word, you know, not intentional, when we were talking earlier, and I was just thinking about, you know, people who are maybe prisoners or who have really done some terrible things to other human beings, and I often think of parents of children, and when they lose children and they were able to reconcile with the person that maybe killed their child, right? And so what I was thinking about was when you work with people who maybe have done things where, let's say it is a prisoner who's maybe changed their ways and is now really realizing they did something really awful. But when it was in their control, you know, is that as a as a practitioner of this, is that hard for you? Does that make it more difficult, or do you think even society has the tolerance to want to hear that too?
Well, and I think that we very often won't admit that I did anything wrong, you know, then that can screw up memories too. And if you try and force the memory to be remembered differently, then in fact you are remembering it, but I don't want to tell someone else it was my fault or I did it. We really have to have some humility and realize our own humanity as we try and participate in any of these things, it seems to me.
You do, but think about when you get a family reunion and you're talking to your sibling or cousin or something, and they remember the whole thing differently than you. Memories are always seen through the lenses of our background, always. And your memories are not always truth. They're true, but they're not truth. So if you know that going in, that other people are going to have a different perspective, it is difficult to listen to some of these traumatic stories when, like you said, you have a perpetrator and who now realizes what they did and the consequences of it. But while you're listening, you can be non-judgmental because they're probably beating themselves up quite a bit.
If they've gotten to the point where they're talking about it and owning it, yeah, I'm sure they have.
And so, I don't know, I would say it's hard to hear the stories because there's always a story behind the story. And when you look at people who've done terrible things, most of the time, terrible things were done to that person.
Oh, that seems so wrong, so doubly hard, you know. To remember that would be quite a difficult thing, but it's probably so true. Really interesting. Some of the things, have you done much work with, I know there's a lot of work being done with the telling your story for the sense of restorative justice in the prison. And this seems to tie together beautifully with that need for the restorative justice really looks at trying to not wait for some external justice to be perpetrated upon us, you know, but that we together talk through whatever that was and until we can sense that there is some restoring of balance. Am I saying that well enough?
I think so. In the actual Healing of Memories workshops, we try to have both sides represented. This program came about originally in South Africa and during the Truth and Reconciliation period of time. So they would have workshops where they would have both and all sides represented. So like in some of our workshops, we have had sexual assault victims and sexual assault perpetrators. And the amazing healing that can come both ways when both tell their story, both feel and recognize their feeling, and they see each other's humanity. So when the perpetrator actually says, on behalf of your perpetrator, I'm sorry. I am so sorry that happened to you. You know, that's very, very healing. Because, you know, you tend to say, well, maybe partially it was my fault, or maybe I was in the wrong place, or maybe I was dressing incorrectly, or whatever. But that's really not what it's about. It's a violation of personal integrity.
It's an act of violence,
Yeah. So to have someone say, even if it is a stranger, that should not have happened to you. You were wronged. I am sorry. It makes a difference in our ability to heal those memories.
You can also imagine how then the ones that do not get healed can be generationally passed on and passed on. So that something as traumatic as the Indian Wars or as slavery, it makes sense that even today the young people growing are experiencing the heritage of those very traumatic times way back then when they weren't even born. But when no one has taken, we're trying, I suppose, but not maybe succeeding as well as we ought to, in order to really acknowledge the incredible trauma that happened. My tendency is always to say, but I didn't do it. I mean, I wasn't even here, and my
we weren't even
relatives
born.
weren't even
Sure.
here. I mean, it's really easy to become the one to say, but not me. I'm not the one that did this. We can still be very much a part of the healing process by listening, and being the ones who say, you were harmed. That was so wrong. And being able to, I guess, in a way, give them the sense that, indeed, I'm a human being, you're a human being, and I'm telling you, from my perspective, you have every right to feel the way you do.
That's right.
Yeah.
How do you get the word out to the right people to come to your workshops?
That is a challenge. I work a lot with the veteran community, and the Minnesota Assistance Council for Veterans has been sending people to our workshops ever since they first began in 2009. So they are a great resource. We have flyers and work with healthcare professionals and clinics. We try to get flyers out, but that is a challenge.
Do you have a website?
We have a website, the healingmemoriesnorthamerica.org.
Great. And then just in about the minute or so we have left, if someone out there's been listening to this conversation and is thinking to themselves, you know, I've got some stuff that I'd like to maybe explore or talk about, what would you say to them?
Well, I guess the first thing would be look at someone that you are comfortable with. Now, maybe a friend, but not necessarily your best friend, and start the process of telling your story. Or for some people, journaling, or even making a tape recording. Just a place to start. And if you look up Healing of Memories on the web, you can get connected to Minnesota Healing of Memories. And if they would like to attend a workshop, we have one coming up in April, so that's always good. April 6th through 8th at the ARC Retreat Center at Stanchville. But I am the point of contact for that.
Great.
And
Do you put veterans as well as non-veterans? You try and create some kind of a mix.
Yes.
Okay.
Again, if you have an other, you want that other to be there. And so for the military people who have gone through a lot of trauma, it's good to have someone who, maybe a war protester, what was your side? What was your story?
Yeah.
That's very healing in and of itself.
Well, Sheila, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been a fabulous conversation. We've learned so much, and I think it's really timely with what we've got going on in this world.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks, Sheila.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we thank you for joining us today on It's a Woman's World, and we hope to see you next time.